I did not expect the first words I heard when I stepped back into my childhood home to be an order directed at my body. I had been gone 13 years long enough to imagine that people change long enough to hope that time softens the sharpest edges long enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, returning for my father's memorial would feel like coming home. Instead, I stood inside the narrow hallway of the Fayetteville house where I grew up and heard my stepmother Laura snap at her daughter with a voice so sharp it cut through the chatter of the living room. "She is not family. Teach her what pain is." I froze. Everyone else did too. It took a full second before the words fully sank into the air. Aubrey, her daughter, her pride, her gleaming reflection spun around toward me. I saw the anger she had inherited from her mother hardening across her face. The guests in the house turned to watch, their eyes bouncing between us like this was some spectacle they had paid to see. I had been back for less than 90 seconds. I had not even taken off my boots. I was still carrying the small bouquet of white lilies I had brought for my father's memorial table. The smell of them lingered faintly, a soft scent at war with the bitterness spreading around me. Aubrey moved first. She stepped toward me with a glare so confident it felt rehearsed. She shoved me with both hands, hard. My body hit the corner of the wooden shelving beside the doorway. A dull shock went through my shoulder and down my spine. The lilies slipped out of my hand and scattered across the floor. Someone gasped, but no one stepped in. No one said, "Stop." Not even my stepbrother Hunter, who leaned casually against the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed, watching as if this was all familiar entertainment. The humiliation hit faster than the pain. A stinging mix of outrage and disbelief settled into my chest. I straightened slowly. Years of training made me check my stance automatically. I could hear my MP instructor's voice in my head. Never escalate. Observe first. My uniform had taught me discipline long before this moment. My childhood had taught me silence. But this was different. I was not a 12-year-old girl being told to sit down and keep quiet. I was not a teenager being pushed aside for the sake of Laura's real children. I was Captain Sloan Kerrigan of the United States Army Military Police. 31 years old, 13 years of service, countless de-escalation operations. I was not fragile. I was not powerless. Yet standing in that living room, surrounded by people who still saw me as the outsider who never deserved a seat at their table, I felt my stomach twist in an old, familiar way. Flashback. My stepsister slamming my bedroom door on me at 15 and laughing when I begged her to return my textbooks. My stepbrother telling me to eat in the garage because the dining table was only for family. Laura gripping my wrist at my father's funeral and whispering that crying made me look dramatic and ungrateful. "You are not one of us." The phrase echoed somewhere deep. I thought I had buried all that. I thought I had rebuilt myself strong enough that none of this could touch me again. But it did. The humiliation of that moment hit like a wave. Aubrey stepped closer. She was enjoying this. Her lips curled at the edges just slightly. She nudged one of the lilies with her shoe like it was trash. "Pick it up." Her voice was quiet but sharp. Laura stood behind her with the same cold satisfaction she had worn for years. This was never about grief for the man we all lost. This was about reminding me of my place. Hunter moved to block the hallway behind me. "You leave when we say you leave." My pulse kicked harder. Not fear. Calculation. My training turned on like a switch. I assessed distance angles, exits, witnesses. My body understood threat even when my heart was still catching up. I inhaled slowly. Then I looked up. Really looked. I met Laura's eyes first. She stiffened because something in mine changed. Then I met Aubrey's. Her confidence flickered for half a second. She did not understand why. She did not know that a person raised in cruelty learns to read danger the way others read weather. She did not know what 13 years in the Army had forged into me. But I did. I shifted my stance slightly, barely noticeable. A relaxed, centered posture that said I was not intimidated and I was not leaving. Someone close to the kitchen whispered that I looked calm in a way that made them uneasy. Good. Calm is what comes right before clarity, and clarity is what destroys people like Laura. I took another breath and said nothing at all. Silence can be louder than shouting. My father used to tell me that. The room felt different now, charged, waiting. And then, something inside me settled. It was not anger, it was resolve. I bent down, gathered the lilies carefully, and brushed the dust from their petals. I stood tall again and held them to my chest. If you have ever been treated like an outsider in your own home, tell me where you are watching from. I was 12 the year Laura married my father, and even at that age, I understood something was shifting beneath my feet. Something small at first, like the quiet creak of a foundation settling before the whole frame tilts, and you realize the house you live in is no longer the same. I remember the wedding ceremony at the small Methodist church off Ramsey Street, the scent of fake lilies mixed with perfume that clung too long in the air, the forced smiles from relatives who had never met Laura but nodded politely because they wanted my father to be happy. I stood beside him in a simple navy dress he had helped me pick out from the clearance rack at JCPenney. He was a gentleman, reserved kind, always trying to fix what was cracked, even when it was not his job to fix it. When he introduced me to Laura's children for the first time, Aubrey glanced at me like I was a stray that wandered in, and Hunter did not bother masking his annoyance. I remember the exact words he said when Laura walked away to take a phone call. "Looks like we got someone we have to share things with now," as if I was an intrusion rather than a person. It did not take long for the favoritism to settle into a permanent pattern. At school pickup, Laura brought snacks only for her children. At home, she assigned Aubrey the sunlit bedroom with the walk-in closet while I was moved into the smaller room that used to be a storage space still smelling faintly of paint thinner and cardboard. When chores needed doing, Laura sent me. When praise was given, it went to her children. When something broke, it was my fault. I would come home from school to find my drawers rifled through my journals, moved my hairbrush missing, and Laura would shrug with a tone so dismissive it felt like a slap. "You are too sensitive. Sloane, stop making everything dramatic." Privacy became a luxury I could not afford. There were nights I heard them laughing behind closed doors, voices warm and light, while I sat alone at the kitchen table finishing homework under the buzzing fluorescent bulb that flickered every few minutes. There were mornings when Laura packed lunches for Aubrey and Hunter with neatly cut sandwiches and fresh fruit while pushing a crumpled dollar bill across the counter to me. Buy something at school. Not because she forgot, but because remembering me was never the priority. My father did what he could. He left notes for me on the fridge, small reminders that he loved me. He drove me to softball practice while Laura attended Aubrey's dance recitals. He made an effort to include me in conversations even when Laura gently steered him away. But he was outnumbered in his own house, and he was tired. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped when he walked through the door after work, exhausted lines deepening at the corners of his eyes. My father's health declined when I was 17. It happened fast. One month he was fixing the backyard fence, the next he could barely stand without bracing himself against the counter. The doctors said complications nothing anyone could predict. Laura managed the insurance papers with an eagerness that should have alarmed me sooner. She spoke in hushed tones to her sister on the phone about assets and responsibility. I was too young to understand the legal landscape shifting beneath us, too naive to recognize she was setting the pieces in place long before my father exhaled his last quiet breath in the upstairs bedroom. The funeral was small. I remember staring at the polished oak of his casket while Laura dabbed her eyes with a tissue and accepted condolences with a gracefully practiced grief. Aubrey held her mother's arm, and Hunter stood tall beside them both, receiving sympathetic glances as though they were the rightful heartbroken ones. No one came to stand beside me. I remember Laura gripping my wrist when I cried and whispering harshly that people would think I was seeking attention. My father's will should have given me half the house. I did not know that at the time. What I knew was that 1 week after the funeral, Laura called a family meeting in the living room and informed me that things had changed. She said we all needed space. She said the home environment was too emotional for me. She said I should consider moving in with relatives. And then she ended the conversation with a sentence that has echoed in my memory with the persistence of a bruise that never fully heals. "You are not one of us, Sloane." Something in me cracked open at those words. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, like the clean snap of a branch in the woods. I packed my bags while Aubrey watched from the doorway with folded arms and a smirk she did not bother hiding. Hunter helped carry nothing. Laura hovered to make sure I did not take anything she considered theirs. I walked out of the house that day with a duffel bag, a handful of textbooks, and the life insurance flag the Army had sent after my grandfather passed years earlier. I did not look back. I took the bus to a recruiter's office near Bragg Boulevard. The decision was simple, almost instinctive. I wanted a place governed by rules, not whims. A place where rank was earned, not gifted. A place where I did not have to fight to justify my presence. The recruiter asked why I wanted the Army. I told him I wanted structure. I told him I wanted purpose. The truth was simpler. I wanted distance. I wanted to build a life that could never again be controlled by people who viewed me as disposable. I signed my enlistment papers 2 weeks later, and from the moment I stepped onto that bus for basic training, I promised myself one thing. If I ever returned to that house, it would not be as the girl they diminished. It would be as the woman I chose to become. When I arrived at Fort Leonard Wood for military police training, the bus doors opened to a world that felt nothing like the house I had escaped. There was noise everywhere, drill sergeants shouting commands, boots hitting pavement in synchronized rhythm, metal clanking from distant weapon racks. But beneath all that noise lay something I had never known at home, something steady and reliable. Order. The first morning, the air was cold enough that every exhale turned white. We stood shoulder to shoulder in formation while the sun pulled itself over the Missouri tree line. Our drill sergeant paced slowly in front of us, not looking at faces, only at posture. Back straight, chin up heels, together eyes forward. There were no favorites. No one received a gentler command or a harsher tone because of who they were. Every correction, every instruction, every barked order was delivered with the same uncompromising fairness. You do the work or you do not. You improve or you repeat. You earn your place or you step aside. This was the opposite of the life I grew up in. The first week nearly broke most of us. Early mornings, long ruck marches along route-red weapons drills under afternoon heat that made the gravel shimmer push-ups until our arms trembled, and miles of running that left the joints aching long after lights out. I had blisters on my heels, bruises across my shins, and a soreness that reached even the parts of me I did not know existed. None of it felt cruel. None of it felt personal. It felt purposeful. The Army never asked if I deserved to be there. It asked only if I was willing to work for it. I learned quickly that tactical restraint was not just a technique. It was a mindset. Controlling a violent subject required calm, not anger. Leverage, not strength. Timing, not ego. Our instructors demonstrated arm control and joint manipulation with a precision that fascinated me. They showed how a simple shift of weight could redirect a person twice your size, how positioning your hips could determine whether a situation escalated or ended quietly. We practiced until our hands moved before thought, until our bodies recognized threat patterns faster than the mind could name them. The discipline felt like armor wrapping itself around me one layer at a time. Home had taught me fear in the form of silent tolerance. The Army taught me that fear loses its power once you learn how to stand your ground. One afternoon during defensive tactics training, Sergeant Clayton stood behind me, his voice low and controlled. Breathe through the movement, Kerrigan. You do not overpower. You outthink. That sentence stayed with me for years. In the house I grew up in, arguments ended when someone raised their voice or slammed a door, and control belonged to whoever was loudest. Here, control belonged to the one who stayed calm. The more I trained, the more my body carried itself differently. My stance changed. My reactions sharpened. I walked with purpose instead of watching for danger from behind. At home, I was always anticipating, always bracing. Here, I was building. Physical training pushed us to limits I did not know I had. Running the ridgelines behind the cantonment area at dawn, our platoon formed a long line of silhouettes against the red sky. Sweat stung my eyes and my lungs burned, but for the first time in my life, the pain was meaningful, not inflicted by cruelty or neglect. We ran not because someone wanted to prove dominance, but because the mission required endurance. At night, lying in the top bunk of the barracks, I listened to the steady breathing of the women around me. Some cried softly into their pillows the first weeks overwhelmed by the intensity. Some whispered about home and the people waiting for them. I stayed quiet. No one was waiting for me, and in a strange way that made me feel lighter. I had nothing to lose and everything to build. During field exercises, we learned how to secure crime scenes, detain aggressive subjects, and maintain situational awareness in chaotic environments. The instructors drilled into us that military police were not simply enforcers. We were stabilizers, the first on scene when everything was falling apart. The ones who restored order, not added to the chaos. That role resonated with me. I understood instability intimately. I had lived inside it for years. Becoming someone who could create order felt like rewriting my entire identity. One training day stands out in my memory. We were paired for a scenario that simulated a domestic disturbance. My partner played the volatile subject, stepping toward me quickly, shouting, throwing his arms in exaggerated motion. I felt a flicker of old panic, the kind I used to feel when my stepmother's anger filled a room. But the next second, training took over. My feet shifted just slightly. My voice came out even. "Sir, I need you to take a step back." When he continued forward, I positioned myself at an angle, redirected his arm, and used controlled downward pressure to guide him to the ground without harm. The instructor blew the whistle. "Good control, Kerrigan. Calm under pressure." That praise, that simple sentence delivered without favoritism or comparison, meant more to me than anything I had heard growing up. In my family, recognition was reserved for Laura's children. In the Army, recognition was earned. After graduation from MP school, I stood in uniform with the rest of my platoon. My boots were scuffed, my beret sat squarely on my head, and my name tape felt real in a way my own last name had never been allowed to feel in my father's house. I had crossed a threshold. The Army did not erase the past, but it showed me something my home never did. Justice can exist. Fairness can exist. Discipline can protect rather than control. I carried these truths with me through every assignment that followed, through every base, every operation, every shift on patrol. And when I finally returned to Fayetteville 13 years later, those truths walked in beside me. The girl they tried to diminish was long gone. The woman who stepped into that house was shaped by structure, sharpened by resilience, and strengthened by a life built far away from their chaos. They did not know it yet. They would. Driving back into Fayetteville after 13 years felt like entering a version of myself I no longer recognized. The roads were familiar, the same long stretch of Ramsey Street, the same convenience stores, the same small diners with neon signs flickering in the afternoon haze. But I felt detached from all of it, as though I were watching someone else's memories rolling past the window. I parked a block away from the house on purpose. I needed a moment before walking into a place that had shaped me through absence more than presence. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The siding had faded, the porch railing sagged a little, the flower beds were overgrown. Time had not been kind to it, but the smell of pine and warm Carolina air made the moment heavier. For a second, I wondered if I should have stayed away. But I came for my father. Nothing else. Inside, voices echoed through the hallway. I stepped through the doorway, and the room fell into that quick, unnatural silence people make when they are caught talking about someone behind their back. Then they smiled too widely, as if the smile could cover the truth. Laura stood near the dining table, arranging a centerpiece of white candles and framed photos of my father. She barely looked at me before saying, "It is a family event. Sit in the back." Not hello. Not thanks for coming. Not even a nod of acknowledgement. Just instructions delivered with the same tone she used when assigning chores when I was a child. Sit in the back. As if I were a guest. As if the man whose photo sat beneath those candles had not been my father. I set my jaw and kept walking. Aubrey appeared next, her steps exaggerated, her smile bright and sharp as a blade. She lifted her left hand immediately. "Look at this!" She waved her newly polished engagement ring inches from my face like she was displaying a trophy. 3 carats, she said, letting each syllable hang as though waiting for applause. He proposed last month. Mom helped him pick the ring because she knows quality. The implication was obvious. I did not. She made sure others around her heard her say it. I nodded once, offering nothing to fuel her performance. She hated that. People like her only enjoy a show when the other person flinches. Hunter strolled in behind her with the swagger of someone who believed his life was unfolding perfectly. He took a long sip from a beer can and pointed at himself with a grin. Got promoted, he announced loudly. Assistant manager at the dealership now. Mom pulled some strings. He lowered his voice slightly and added with pride, connections matter. I remembered him failing out of community college because he never showed up to class. I remembered him crashing his first car because he was racing another kid down Rose Hill Road. And yet, here he was beaming as though every achievement had been the product of discipline, rather than Laura's determination to elevate her own children while stepping on me. The dining room table was set for the memorial dinner. A framed photo of my father sat in the center, surrounded by a simple wreath of greenery. People gathered around it, whispering respectfully until Laura motioned for someone to bring folding chairs for the extra guests. She directed them all around the table. Then she looked at me. There is space near the wall. You can sit there. I glanced around the room. Every seat at the table was arranged carefully for people she deemed important. I was placed against the wall beside a storage cabinet with a flickering lamp overhead, a position that did not feel accidental. I took the seat without responding. Sometimes silence is the most precise blade. A cousin I barely recognized offered me a sympathetic smile, the kind people give when they sense something is wrong but are too polite to address it. Most others avoided eye contact not out of malice, but out of discomfort. They understood enough to feel uneasy, yet not enough to intervene. Laura lifted her glass for a toast. Thank you all for coming to honor my husband. My breath caught. My husband. As though I was not sitting 10 feet away, as though my father had existed only within the world she allowed. She continued, I raised these children the best I could. She gestured toward Aubrey and Hunter. They have made me so proud. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I breathed through it. The conversations resumed. Aubrey leaned across the table, her voice raised just enough for me to hear. I am planning a summer wedding. Mom says she will help pay. Mom says it is only right to invest in the child who stayed and supported her. She glanced at me with that smug tilt of her chin. Some people just leave, you know. I felt the weight of the room press against me. They were rewriting history in real time. I could have corrected them. I could have listed every moment they had pushed me away, every insult, every dismissal, every time they made it clear I was an outsider in the home where my father raised me. I could have told them that Laura sent me out the door at 17 with no plan, no guidance, no family to lean on. Instead, I sat there, letting the truth simmer beneath my ribs like a steady heat. It is astonishing how memory can be both a wound and a compass. 13 years in the Army had taught me patience and precision, taught me to wait for the right moment rather than react to the first spark. They still saw me as the quiet girl who let their cruelty wash over her. They had no idea who I had become. At one point, Laura turned to a guest and said loudly, Some people just do not understand loyalty. They only show up when it benefits them. She turned her eyes toward me with a thin smile that did not reach her cheeks. I met her stare without blinking. That surprised her. She expected deference. She expected the girl she bullied into silence. Instead, she saw someone steady, someone rebuilt, someone who no longer needed her approval or fear. The entire evening felt like a stage play, each participant reading from the same script they had rehearsed for years, a script where Aubrey sparkled, Hunter bragged, and Laura ruled unquestioned, and I sat there like an extra in my own family. They thought this was the end of the story. They thought sitting me at the wall meant burying the girl they tried to erase. They did not understand that I had come not as a spectator, but as someone ready to see everything clearly. I lifted my glass to my father's photo, not to Laura's performance. I whispered quietly enough that only I could hear it. I am here, Dad, and I am not leaving quietly this time. I should have expected the moment things would turn because in families like mine, cruelty rarely stays quiet for long. It always waits, simmering beneath the surface, looking for the slightest excuse to erupt. And Laura found hers when conversation around the table drifted toward childhood memories. Someone mentioned my father teaching me how to fix the old lawnmower in the garage, something he never managed to teach Hunter because Hunter never cared to try. The remark was harmless, but Laura stiffened instantly the way someone does when a narrative they carefully crafted begins to crack. She placed her glass down with a deliberate elegance, the kind she always used when she wanted control. Then she said with a voice loud enough for the entire room, "Some people exaggerate the past for attention." My eyes lifted slowly. I did not respond. But silence is dangerous in a room full of insecure people. They see it as defiance. They react to it as threat. Aubrey, sitting 2 chairs down, leaned her elbows on the table and tilted her head, studying me. "When you left, Mom had to hold this family together." She paused as though expecting applause. "And now, you show up acting like you belong here." Before I could speak, Laura cut in sharply. She never belonged. Then she turned to Aubrey, her tone sharpening into the command that would ignite everything that followed. "She is not family. Teach her what pain is." The words sliced through the room like a cold blade. Some guests gasped. Some looked away. No one intervened. Aubrey rose from her chair with a confidence that came from a lifetime of being told she was untouchable. She stepped toward me with a smirk that reminded me of the years she spent pushing me, cornering me, taunting me safe in the knowledge that Laura would always protect her. She shoved me again harder this time, her palms slamming against my shoulder. The impact sent a jolt through my arm, and the chair I was sitting on scraped loudly across the floor as I caught myself before falling. I stayed upright. Hunter, already watching with anticipation, moved behind me to block the doorway. He positioned himself there like a guard, arms crossed, chin lifted. "You leave when we say you leave." His tone was low, but clear enough for the room to hear. I scanned the space quickly. My MP training slipped into place like muscle memory, covering every instinct with method. Assess threats, identify exits, avoid escalation, preserve safety. My pulse remained steady, my breath even. I rose from my chair with controlled precision. I did not raise my hands or shift into a defensive stance, though part of me wanted to. Years of training told me that any gesture resembling force could be twisted into blame, and in this house, blame always traveled in one direction. Aubrey moved closer, standing far too close, her perfume sharp and synthetic. She lifted her chin in a challenge. "What now, Army girl, going to cry like you used to?" Her voice dripped with the same adolescent cruelty she never outgrew. The room watched, eager, anxious, unsure. My stepmother's eyes glittered with something vicious and triumphant. This was all she ever wanted, the chance to cut me down publicly, to prove that no matter who I was outside these walls, inside them, she could still dictate who mattered and who did not. I looked at her, and it was like staring at a person who had spent years building her identity on diminishing others. Everything she believed about power came from causing pain. Everything she believed about loyalty came from control. I inhaled slowly. "Only use force when required for safety." The line repeated in my mind with the clarity of a command shouted across a drill field. I stood perfectly still, feet grounded, eyes steady, voice level. "I am not here to fight any of you." Aubrey laughed sharply. "That is because you would lose." Hunter stepped closer behind me. "We are not done. You walk out when we say the night is over." I could feel the room holding its breath. Some looked at me with unease, some with morbid curiosity, some with disappointment, as though they expected drama and wanted me to perform it. In another life, a younger version of me might have begged them to stop, might have cried or pleaded or tried to reason. But the woman standing in this room now was not that girl. I kept my voice steady, quieter than theirs, but stronger for it. "Move out of my way." Hunter smirked. "Make me." Laura folded her arms in satisfaction. She wanted the spectacle. She wanted the proof that her children were dominant, that I remained beneath them, but the truth was simple. I did not need their approval. I did not need their validation, and I certainly did not need to perform for their entertainment. So I stepped to the side, slowly forcing Hunter to react. He moved to block me again, chest puffed. I did not flinch. I did not touch him. Instead, I took one small step backward toward the open living room, keeping space between us. This annoyed him more than any resistance could have. "You think you can ignore us?" he said, voice thickening with frustration. Aubrey chimed in. "Mom said to teach you your place." I met her stare. Something in mine made her blink. She expected fear. She found none. I said nothing. Silence again became its own answer. Silence unnerved them far more than retaliation. Silence is control in the hands of someone who has survived enough chaos to recognize power when they hold it. The tension rose sharp and electric. People shifted in their chairs. A cousin whispered that someone should stop this. No one moved. I realized then that this family would never choose the right thing unless someone forced them to face the truth. But not tonight. Tonight was observation. Tonight was precision. I walked toward the hallway with slow, deliberate steps. Hunter moved again to block me, but this time my pause was firmer. My eyes locked on his with a gaze that held years of restraint behind it. "Do not move any closer to me." My tone was calm, measured, and unmistakably authoritative. He froze. Everyone saw it. A soldier's authority carries weight even outside the uniform. After a silence that felt longer than it was, Hunter stepped aside, not out of respect, out of confusion, out of a hesitation he did not understand. I walked toward the exit without another word. Behind me, Laura's voice echoed in a tight hiss. "This is not over Sloane." She was right, it was not, but not in the way she believed. The moment I stepped out that door, the lines of this story shifted. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought their control was absolute. They had no idea that while they clung to their old tactics, I carried something far stronger: discipline, clarity, and the truth. The night had only begun to unravel. When I stepped out of that house, the night air hit me with a coldness that felt cleaner than anything I had breathed indoors. The porch light cast a dim glow across the yard, highlighting the uneven cracks in the walkway where my father used to kneel with a trowel and patch concrete on Saturday mornings. I stood there for a moment, letting the door close behind me, letting the noise of their voices dull into a muted hum, letting the weight of what had just happened settle across my shoulders the way a soldier adjusts to the heaviness of body armor. I felt humiliation, first sharp and bitter, curling through my chest in a way that felt younger than my 31 years. That feeling belonged to the girl they used to push aside, the girl who slept in the smallest room, the girl who lost her father and then lost her place in her own home. My breath shook once. Just once. Then the tremor quieted. The next feeling was restraint. Years of training rose up inside me with a steadiness that had kept me alive in situations far more dangerous than a living room full of petty cruelty. Never escalate. Never give someone ammunition they do not deserve. Never let anger make you predictable. These were principles drilled into me on the red dirt of Fort Leonard Wood, whispered again by seasoned MPs who had seen careers ruined by moments of impulse. Restraint is not weakness, they said. Restraint is mastery. I had walked out that door without pushing back, without arguing, without raising my voice, and that choice was not submission. It was strategy. Still beneath the discipline, a deeper ache pressed against my ribs. The humiliation was not about the shove. It was about the way they all looked at me as though I were a guest who overstayed her welcome, as though my father's blood did not run just as strongly in me as it ever did in the man whose photo sat beneath those candles. They rewrote my history with a confidence born from knowing no one there would contradict them. That injustice is what stung, not the physical push, the lie of it, the rewriting of the past to suit their comfort, the dismissal of my place in a home that once held everything I loved. But after humiliation and restraint came something far steadier: clarity. I remembered a phrase my instructor had once said during a briefing after a particularly tense mission. Justice is not loud, it is procedural. It was the kind of sentence that stays with you, not because it is poetic, but because it is true. Loud reactions burn fast. Quiet procedure burns deep. Justice built on evidence does not wobble. It holds. That thought settled into me with the weight of a decision that had been quietly forming for years without me naming it. I stepped off the porch and walked toward my car, my footsteps steady and unhurried. The night around me was still. A few cicadas buzzed in the trees. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds. Grounding sounds. I reached my car door and paused with my hand on the handle. A single question pushed forward in my mind. Why today? Why had Laura been so confident? Why had she been so fearless in humiliating me? Why had she spoken about loyalty and dedication as though I had abandoned them for fun rather than survival? People only cling that tightly to their narrative when there is something beneath it they are terrified to lose. I opened the car door slowly, not to leave, but to give myself another moment to think. Their strength came from perception. Their control came from rewriting history. Their power came from keeping me outside the story, so no one questioned theirs. And now, with me back in town, even for a memorial dinner, that control slipped. They could not allow that, so they tried to dominate the moment. They tried to push me down. They tried to remind me of a hierarchy they invented. But hierarchies built on lies collapse as soon as the truth enters the room. I sat in the driver's seat and leaned back, staring through the windshield at the dim lights glowing inside the house. Behind those walls, they were probably already retelling what happened, twisting details to absolve themselves, accusing me of overreacting, convincing themselves I was the problem. It almost made me laugh. They thought they had won something tonight. They had no idea the game had changed. I was done letting them dictate the story. I was done letting them decide who I was. I was done letting them use my silence to pretend their cruelty was justified. I would not fight them the way they expected. I would not storm back into the house shouting accusations. I would not push or shove or match their theatrics. I would dismantle them the way MPs are trained to dismantle chaos. With evidence, with process, with precision. My father deserved better than the way they used his memory, and I deserved the truth about what happened to everything he intended to leave me. I took a slow breath, the kind they teach you to take before making a calculated move. My humiliation faded. My restraint settled into something steadier. Resolve. I whispered quietly, not for them, not even for myself, but for the part of me that still missed my father. This time, I will not walk away empty-handed. This time, I will not let them decide the ending. I put the keys into the ignition. The engine hummed to life. And as I pulled away from the house, leaving their warm lights behind, I felt it clearly. The first shift in momentum. They thought their cruelty defined me. They thought their control still held power. They thought humiliating me would keep me quiet. They did not understand that humiliation is not the end of a story. Sometimes it is the spark, and sometimes the quietest person in the room becomes the one who brings everything into the light. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest that felt like the residue of a bad dream, except nothing about last night had been imagined. I lay still in the quiet of my apartment near Fort Liberty, staring at the ceiling, replaying the words, the shove, the looks, the tone of ownership in their voices. I had intended to stay in town only for the memorial, pay my respects, and return to base. But something deeper stirred under the humiliation they tried to inflict. A pull, a question, a responsibility. My father had always told me that truth leaves footprints, even when people try to bury it. I got out of bed, slowly brewed a cup of coffee, and stood by the window watching the sunlight cut across the pavement. As I sipped, the same question from last night resurfaced. Why were they so confident? Why were they so sure I had no claim, no presence, no connection to that house? Why were they so pressed to remind me that I was not family? Not unless they needed me to believe it. Not unless they feared something that could unravel them. If there was one thing the Army taught me, it was that patterns always lead somewhere. Motive comes from fear. Fear comes from risk. And risk comes from truth. I grabbed my keys and headed toward my car. Instead of driving to the base gym or the grocery store like I usually did on my days off, I turned toward downtown Fayetteville, toward the county records building, toward the place where truth physically lived in paper and ink. The building was old with beige stone columns and creaking glass doors. A sign near the entrance read Cumberland County Register of Deeds. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old documents and the metallic whir of copiers. A row of computers sat against the far wall, each displaying a login screen for public records access. A woman behind the counter greeted me with a polite but tired smile and asked if I needed help. I answered honestly. I am looking for probate documents. My father passed when I was 17. I believe something may have been filed incorrectly. She gave me a sympathetic look and directed me toward the archives terminal in the back. I sat down, entered his name, hit search, and waited. A list of entries appeared, most of them routine death certificate property tax updates, a few unrelated filings. But something felt off. There should have been more. A will should produce a cluster of documents, executor information, property division filings, probate closure. Yet nothing of that weight appeared. It was as if no will had ever existed. But I remembered my father telling me directly months before he died that he had arranged everything. He never left things unfinished. So I asked the clerk whether older files might be archived physically instead of digitally. She checked. After a few minutes, she returned with a thin beige folder labeled Kerrigan Thomas Andrew. It was far too thin. Wills are not thin. Grief paperwork is not thin. She placed it on the table in front of me. I opened it. Inside were just 4 sheets of paper. 4. My pulse picked up a steady beat in my throat. The first page was a probate declaration of no will found. My breath stalled. The clerk glanced at me, unsure if she should give me privacy or help. I told her I was fine, but my fingers tightened slightly on the corner of the document. The second page listed property transfer of the family home to Laura Kerrigan's surviving spouse. The third page was a notarized statement of voluntary heir relinquishment. My name was on it. My signature was on it. Except it wasn't. My heart went cold in a way I had not felt in years, not even on deployments when decisions carried life and death. I stared at the slanted cursive, the loops too round the flourish on the K that I never used. Whoever forged it had confidence that a 17-year-old girl grieving her father would not think to question legal filings years later. The fourth page was a notarization stamp from a man who, according to the date, had retired a decade ago. Convenient. The clerk noticed the shift in my face. "Is everything all right?" I nodded, though the word all right felt so far away it barely belonged in the building. I scanned each page again, slower this time. She never wanted me to know. She never wanted me to have anything that tied me back to him. She wanted the house, the accounts, the authority. And the only thing standing in her way had been a teenage girl with no power and no understanding of legal processes. She solved that problem by inventing my consent. Rage was not the first emotion that came. Shock was. Shock so profound that for a few seconds all I heard was the low hum of the building's air conditioning. But beneath that shock, something stronger formed. Precision. Everything she did had left a trace. A forged signature. An outdated notary stamp. A sudden disappearance of a will my father had promised existed. Lies have weak foundations. Evidence does not. I closed the folder gently and asked the clerk for certified copies. She printed them and placed them in a clear envelope. As I held it, I felt the weight of it in my hand. A small package of truth. The first weapon I would need. The first thread to pull. The first crack in their story. When I stepped outside, sunlight hit my face bright and sharp. I looked at the envelope again. These papers were not just documents. They were exposure waiting to happen. They were the beginning of the undoing. They were the reason Laura had always kept me at a distance. They were the foundation for what would come next. And for the first time in years, I felt the story shifting in my direction. The past was no longer buried. It was in my hands, ready to be used. The sun had already begun sinking when I pulled into the restricted parking lot outside the CID liaison office on the north end of Fort Liberty. The building looked plain from the outside, but anyone who had ever served knew that inside those beige walls lived the one thing toxic families hated most: documentation. Facts, patterns, paper trails, justice that didn't raise its voice. I stepped out of my car and grabbed the envelope from the passenger seat, the same envelope that had sat warm against my palm the entire drive. As I walked toward the entrance, the automatic doors slid open with a soft, mechanical sigh, and the cool air inside washed over me. Behind the front desk, Officer Henrietta Ramos glanced up and broke into a tired but genuine smile. Ramos had been one of the first people I befriended when I joined the MP Corps. Sharp mind, dry humor, zero patience for nonsense. If anyone could verify whether my stepmother had forged half my past, it was her. She raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone who either found treasure or found explosives." I set the envelope on her desk. "Maybe both." Ramos leaned back, crossed her arms, and gave me that look she always used when she knew something serious was coming. "All right, Kerrigan, tell me everything. No rank, no formality, just two soldiers off duty speaking plainly." I told her about the dinner, the shove, the comment, the disrespect, the way they dismissed me like something they scraped off their shoes. But when I reached the part about the county records, her expression shifted from sympathetic to razor-sharp awareness. She straightened. "Someone forged your relinquishment." I nodded once. "And I think they hid my father's real will." Ramos didn't gasp or curse. She just exhaled low and controlled, the way MPs do when restraint replaces rage. "Show me the paperwork." I slid the copies across the desk. She opened the envelope, laid each page carefully in front of her, and shifted into the mode I had seen her use in interrogation rooms and fraud briefings. Analysis, pattern matching, detail slicing. She didn't speak for a full minute, and the silence between us felt heavy, not empty. Finally, she tapped the signature. "This stroke here is inconsistent. Look at the slant. Someone tried to mimic your handwriting, but they overcorrected. You never loop your K like this." My throat tightened. She pointed again. "And the notary stamp is out of date." The man retired before this document was allegedly signed. I felt my heartbeat steady the way it did during tactical drills when you know the objective is finally becoming clear. Ramos opened a drawer, pulled out a small magnifier, and placed it over the signature. "Ink saturation is uneven too. Whoever did this didn't understand how fountain pens distribute pressure." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ramos looked up at me with the seriousness of someone delivering quiet truth. "This is forgery. Clean and simple. And not even good forgery." Rage didn't hit me. Something colder did. Validation. The kind of validation that makes every gaslit memory suddenly stand straight again. She sat back. "And if they forged this, I guarantee this isn't the only thing they falsified." The words felt heavy and correct. I hesitated before asking the next question. "Can you run it?" Ramos knew what I meant. "Can you check whether the signature pattern matches any other documents filed by my stepmother? Can you connect ink pressure slant patterns, notarization irregularities? Can you build the case that would make everything they stole unravel?" She nodded slowly. "I can run an unofficial comparison. Not for prosecution, but for clarity. For you." It was enough. She scanned the papers into the system and began pulling up digital files from public property records, loan documents, notarized statements filed under Laura Kerrigan's name. After a few minutes, she froze. "Oh, Sloan." She rotated the monitor toward me. "A property lien on the family home, signed 5 years ago, under my father's name. Except the date was long after he had died." My stomach clenched. Who signed this? Ramos zoomed in. The signature matched the forged relinquishment. The same loops, the same slant, the same pressure inconsistencies. My voice came out low. "She used his signature after he passed." Ramos nodded grimly. "And someone used the house as collateral." I leaned forward. "Who?" She typed quickly, pulling up the secondary loan sheet. "Hunter Kerrigan." I closed my eyes for a full second, letting the fact sink in. My stepbrother had used my father's house, the house they claimed I did not deserve, to pay off a gambling debt. Ramos kept scrolling. "And your stepsister isn't any better." She pulled up a credit usage report publicly linked to a family card tied to the property. These purchases were made by Aubrey, jewelry stores, luxury boutiques in Raleigh, bridal retailers, a $40s and $600 charge from a designer ring shop. A laugh escaped me, sharp and humorless. "The wedding ring." Ramos shook her head. "They didn't just lie to you. They drained your inheritance together. They lived off it. They propped up their lifestyle with it. They buried you to do it." I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not shock anymore, not pain. Purpose. Every thread wasn't separate. It was the same rope they had used to strangle my rights for years, and now it lay stretched out in front of me knot by knot. Ramos folded her arms. Do you want to pursue this officially? I stared at the screen, at the signatures, at the stolen money, at the manufactured narrative they built to erase me. I want the truth documented. I want everything in one place. I want them unable to lie their way out again. Ramos nodded with a firmness I recognized from missions. Then you'll need timestamps comparisons and certified copies of every mismatched document. And when you're ready, I'll help you file with the county fraud department. My throat tightened with something complicated. Loyalty, gratitude, relief. Dude. Ramos tapped the envelope. These papers are your weapon, Sloan. Use them. Soldiers don't swing fists when evidence will do the job cleaner. I exhaled slowly. That's the plan. But before I left, she stopped me with one more sentence. You know what this means, right? This isn't just about the house. This is about a pattern of theft, a pattern of abuse, a pattern of erasing you. When everything comes out, every one of them will fall. Every one of them. My fingers tightened around the envelope again. Good. Let them. Let every lie unravel. Let every secret surface. Let every theft echo. As I stepped back into the golden evening light outside the CID building, I understood something clearly for the first time. This wasn't just a family conflict anymore. This was a case. And cases, unlike people, don't get to rewrite their story when the evidence is lined up correctly. One by one, their sins were stepping into the spotlight. And I would make sure the whole room was watching when the truth finally landed. I pulled into my driveway just after 9, the envelope of evidence sitting on the passenger seat like a quiet heartbeat. The neighborhood was still. Porch lights glowed. A few dogs barked in the distance. It felt like the type of suburban calm people romanticized in postcards. But I'd lived long enough to know that calm wasn't the same thing as safety. I killed the engine, grabbed the envelope, and stepped out. The night air in Fayetteville carried that late summer heaviness, humid enough to cling to my skin. I climbed the porch steps key halfway in the lock when the motion-activated light clicked on behind me. A shadow moved. A figure stood at the bottom of my porch steps. For one breath, everything inside me tightened the way it did before a mission. Then the voice hit me shrill and familiar. You owe us respect. The words sliced the quiet in half. I turned slowly. Laura stood there, hair-messy breath uneven like she had driven fast and rehearsed fury the entire way over. Her cheeks were red eyes, glossy, not from sadness, but from rage. She jabbed a finger toward me. You walk out of my house like you're better than us. You think joining the army changed anything. You owe this family respect. I kept my voice neutral. Laura, it is 9:30 at night. You need to go home. She stomped up one step. I'm not leaving until you stop this attitude, until you apologize to me and my children. I positioned my body slightly sideways, feet planted, hands visible. MP de-escalation stance, low threat, high readiness, calm voice, firm tone. Laura, listen carefully. You need to take 3 steps back from my property. Now! Her eyes flared wide. Don't you dare talk to me like that. I raised one hand slowly, palm toward her. Step back. She stomped up another step. You walk away from us at dinner, you embarrass us, and then you have the nerve to order me off the porch of a house you don't even own. My jaw tightened. She didn't know that I now had documentation proving exactly the opposite, but I didn't argue. MP protocol: never debate with someone in escalation mode. She marched up the last step, invading the porch, getting in my space, breath sour with anger. You think you're something special because you wear that uniform, but you're nothing. You were always nothing. And then she did what I had expected the moment I realized what state she was in. She shoved me. Hard. My back hit the front door. The envelope nearly slipped from my hand. But I didn't respond. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't touch her. I simply repeated the command. Laura, leave. Now. She let out a frustrated screech. "That's it! I'm calling the police!" I blinked. "You came to my house to scream at me and shove me, and you're calling the police!" She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "You pushed me first. You assaulted me. I tried to reason with you and you hit me." She was crying now, loudly, dramatically. I had seen this same performance from detainees who realized their first story wasn't working. She backed off the porch fast, limping slightly to sell the act, still sobbing into the phone. She said loudly enough for the neighborhood to hear, "She hurt me. She hit me. I need help. I need an officer now." My stomach dropped with a mix of disbelief and grim familiarity. She wasn't just lying. She was weaponizing the fact that she assumed I had no evidence. Except I had something she hadn't accounted for. My front porch camera had a clear angle, and a neighbor across the street often left their security floodlight on. But I didn't say a word. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars rolled up, lights flashing silently. A younger officer stepped out first. He approached cautiously. "Ma'am, are you the homeowner?" "Yes, sir." "Captain Sloan Kerrigan." He nodded politely at the rank, but stayed procedural. "We received a call about a domestic disturbance. Claim of physical assault." Before I answered, Laura practically sprinted toward him, sobbing so loudly it echoed. "Officer, she attacked me!" she snapped. "I came here to talk and she shoved me down the stairs. Look at my arm." She thrust her arm forward. The officer inspected it calmly. "Ma'am, I'm going to speak to both of you separately." He walked me aside. "Did you make physical contact with her tonight?" "No, sir." She came onto my porch without permission. I instructed her multiple times to step back. She shoved me. I did not touch her. He nodded once. "Do you have cameras?" "Yes. Front porch and walkway. I can pull the footage." "Perfect. I'll review it after speaking to her." As he walked away, the second officer, older and more experienced, approached me with a knowing look. "Military." "Yes. MP." He exhaled. "This kind of situation is unfortunately common. Stay calm. Let us do our job." Laura, meanwhile, was mid-performance. She paced. She cried. She repeated over and over. "She hit me. She shoved me. I tried to leave. She assaulted me." The younger officer returned to me. "We're going to need to see the footage, ma'am." I pulled it up on my phone. The moment the screen lit, the truth lit with it. Laura on my porch. Laura invading my space. Laura shoving me. Laura collapsing into fake sobs while I stayed frozen hands open, non-threatening. There was no mistaking it. He watched it twice. Then he called the older officer over. They exchanged looks. Professional, but unmistakably annoyed. When they approached Laura, her expression changed from righteous fury to confused panic. The younger officer kept his voice level. "Ma'am, the footage does not support your statement." She stuttered. "You... what?" "No." "She grabbed me. I was defending myself." The officer shook his head. "The video shows you approaching her, entering her porch, and initiating contact." Her mouth dropped open. "That's not possible. She must have edited it." The officer remained steady. "The footage is timestamped and streamed directly. It cannot be altered in real time." She stumbled back. "So what does that mean? Am I the victim here or not?" The older officer answered. "No, ma'am. You are the aggressor, and it appears you knowingly made a false police report." Her face went white. "No. No. I didn't. I didn't. I was scared. She scared me." He raised a hand to quiet her. "We are not placing you under arrest tonight, but you are being issued a formal warning. You are not to return to this property without consent. If you do, you may be charged with trespassing or harassment." She stared at me, then eyes full of shock, betrayal, disbelief, like I had somehow cheated by using truth instead of letting her lie. I didn't smile. I didn't taunt her. I simply held her gaze as the officers escorted her off my lawn. When her car finally pulled away, the older officer gave me a small nod. "You handled that with control. Most people would not have." I thanked him quietly and went inside. When the door shut behind me, I leaned against it for a long moment. Not shaking, not angry, just steady. For the first time in years, the power dynamic had shifted. Not because I shoved her back, Not because I yelled, but because I stood still while she exposed herself. I picked up the envelope again, the evidence inside now feeling heavier. Their collapse had officially begun, and they had started it with their own hands. The Greensboro Country Club was lit up like a wedding venue, all polished chandeliers and white linens, the kind of place Laura loved because it made her feel like someone important. I arrived deliberately late wearing my Class A uniform. Not for vanity, for clarity, for presence, for protection. Military dress carries a certain weight in a room full of people who base their worth on reputation. I stepped inside and immediately felt the air shift. Conversations dipped, eyes lifted. Some stared like they weren't sure whether to salute or whisper. Laura noticed me before anyone else. She stood near the head table holding a glass of champagne, wearing a sequined dress that tried too hard. Her smile froze. "Oh, you decided to come after all." Her voice dripped sugar mixed with poison. "Better late than never." I nodded politely. "I am here to honor my father. Nothing more." She forced a laugh loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. "Of course. Well, find a seat. Somewhere toward the back. We have limited space closer to the family table." Closer to the family table, the same phrase as always, the same hierarchy, the same old wound. But tonight, wounds would become weapons. I scanned the room. All the familiar faces were there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I had not seen in over a decade. They looked at me like I was a ghost stepping into their curated storyline, a character they had been told to dislike without ever questioning why. Aubrey appeared next, wearing a white dress tight enough to signal desperation rather than celebration. She lifted her wine glass. "Wow, Sloane showed up in uniform. How dramatic." "Did you think this was some military ceremony?" I answered calmly. "No, I thought this was a memorial." She rolled her eyes, then slipped into that condescending giggle she had perfected at age 15. "She's not family." She said it loud, clear, and with the confidence of someone who believed the room belonged to her. The same phrase, the same dismissal. But this time, the words did not hit like they used to. This time, they triggered something different, something cold, something exact. I walked to the front of the room. A few relatives shifted awkwardly, whispering. Laura frowned sharply. "What are you doing? This is not your moment." I faced the crowd and kept my voice steady. "My father taught me something important. Truth deserves light, not storage, not hiding, not rewriting." Someone scoffed softly. I ignored it. I pulled the small black USB drive from my pocket. I walked to the projector table at the front. The AV technician, a cousin who barely remembered me, hesitated. I kept my tone polite. "May I borrow the screen for 2 minutes?" Laura stepped forward in panic. "You absolutely may not. This is our event. You don't get to hijack anything." I didn't look at her. I spoke directly to the technician. "Play the file titled Kerrigan Evidence 1. His eyebrows rose. "Evidence." Murmurs spread like small ripples. The projector flickered to life, and then the first scanned page appeared on the massive screen. The forged signature. My forged signature. The room fell silent in an instant, a collective inhale, a bright, clean snapshot of crime. Only one voice broke the quiet. "What is this?" Aubrey asked, her voice trembling. The first page stayed for a moment large enough that even the people at the back could see the differences in pen pressure and handwriting style in slanted letters that were not mine. I clicked to the next slide. CID handwriting comparison report. The red circles around inconsistencies. The notation, likely forged. Laura's face drained of color. Her champagne glass rattled against the table as she set it down too hard. I continued. Next slide. Hunter's loan documents. His signature on a $48,000 personal line of credit secured against the house that legally should have been half mine. Another whisper rose from the crowd. He used the house without permission. Then the next slide. Aubrey's purchases logged under a shared credit line from my father's estate. Jewelry, designer bags, airfare, the $9,800 engagement ring she had bragged about 10 minutes earlier. The audience reaction shifted from curiosity to realization to disgust. I clicked to the final slide. Probate filing stating no will found. Then I placed the original file folder on the front table. Behind me, the room stayed silent, heavy, waiting. Then I spoke. My father did leave a will. I saw him draft it. I was 17. I didn't understand probate law, but I knew he intended the house to be shared. He told me directly. I looked at Laura. You filed a false relinquishment using a forged signature. You hid the will. You claimed sole ownership. You used the house as collateral for your son's gambling debt, and you ran up credit in my father's name to pay for your daughter's luxury lifestyle. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "My God!" Another uncle muttered, "Laura, tell me this is not true." Aubrey stepped forward nervously. "This is all lies. This is all doctored." I clicked to the evidence authenticity page. Verified by CID liaison. Date, stamp, signature. Military accuracy leaves no room for debate. The room turned entirely against them within seconds. "That's not doctored." "What?" someone said. "That's official." "This is fraud," another added. "You stole from Tom's daughter," a cousin whispered. I always knew something was off. "This is unbelievable." An older aunt, my father's sister, stood up trembling. "Laura, you stole from your husband's child. You lied to everyone. You ruined her life at 17. Laura opened her mouth. No, stop. This is all being twisted." She looked around, searching desperately for an ally. None came. The silence tightened around her like rope. Then Hunter bolted. Literally. Grabbed his jacket and sprinted out the side door. A retreat only guilty men make. Aubrey froze in place, mascara trembling. Laura swayed as if the floor beneath her had cracked. It was the first time in my life I had ever seen her powerless. I turned to the room. I am not here for revenge. I am here for truth, for closure, for my father's dignity, and for mine. The silence held, respectful this time, not fear, not doubt. Respect. I ended the presentation, removed the USB, and stepped back. For the first time in 19 years, their narrative collapsed, and mine stood tall. I let the quiet breathe, then delivered the simplest, cleanest CTA I could give at the peak of tension. If you're still watching, comment justice so YouTube knows. The room didn't just fall silent. It tightened. Like every molecule of air inside the Greensboro Country Club suddenly realized it had been participating in a lie for 13 years and was now finally being forced into the light. Laura stood, frozen lips, parted eyes, darting left and right like a trapped animal searching for an exit that no longer existed. Aubrey stared at the screen as if it were a bomb that had just detonated, blowing apart the polished image she spent her entire life curating. Hunter had already run out the door, leaving behind his mother and sister, the way cowards always abandon sinking ships. I remained at the front of the room, hands loosely clasped behind my back. My posture straight, calm, the same stance I'd taken 100 times when delivering an MP operations briefing. Facts first, reactions later. Laura found her voice, though it came out cracked and frantic. This is manipulation. She's twisting everything to make me look bad." She waved her arm in a wild arc toward the projector. "None of this is real. You all know how dramatic she is." My uniform caught the chandelier lights as I turned toward her, and for the first time I saw fear flash behind her eyes. Not fear of violence, fear of exposure, fear of losing control. I maintained the tone I used when briefing commanding officers. "Stepmom, every document displayed tonight comes directly from county records, financial institutions, and handwriting analysis performed by CID liaison officer Henrietta Ramos. Each item has a chain of custody log and a digital timestamp. None of this was altered, edited, or fabricated. These are your signatures. These are your transactions. These are your filings." I let the silence that followed do the rest. An uncle stepped forward, arms crossed tightly. "Laura, why would your daughter run up credit from Tom's estate?" Aubrey stiffened. "I didn't run anything up." That voice cracked at the edges, betraying her. "Sloan is exaggerating. She's jealous because I interrupted not with anger, but with precision. The June 2019 purchase of a $9,000 engagement ring was made using a card linked to the estate account. The transaction log lists the location, the item number, and the signature on the receipt. I pulled a printed page from my folder and held it up. The signature matched the one Aubrey used on her driver's license renewal. Eyes turned toward her like a floodlight. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but no sound came out. When lies crumble, sometimes the collapse is quiet. A cousin pointed at the screen, voice shaking. "Aubrey, you bragged about that ring for months. You said Hayden bought it." Another whispered, "Oh my God." She lied about that too. Aubrey turned red, then pale, then something in between. She stepped back until her shoulder hit a decorative column, trapping her in the truth. Meanwhile, Laura tried another tactic, reaching for sympathy like it was her last lifeline. "You don't understand. I was left alone with 2 children. I had to make decisions. I did the best I could." People nodded, but not in agreement. In disbelief. Finally, Aunt Margaret, my father's older sister, the only person in the family who had ever shown me consistent kindness, walked toward Laura. Slow, deliberate. A hush spread as people instinctively stepped aside to let her pass. She stopped right in front of my stepmother. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. "With betrayal. Laura, you lied to all of us." The sentence landed like a verdict, a final gavel, a clean break. Laura's mouth hung open. I didn't lie. I protected this family. Sloane doesn't know what she's talking about." My aunt's eyes hardened. "You forged her signature. You hid Tom's will. You emptied an account meant for her. You let your children use the home as collateral. You let them steal from their father's name." Her last words were almost a whisper, and somehow that whisper carried across the entire room. "And you left Tom's daughter with nothing but grief." Laura stepped back as if physically hit. Tears welled in her eyes, real or not. I couldn't tell, and I no longer cared. She looked around for support, desperate. But the room had turned. Hard, cold, honest. One cousin shook his head. "You always acted like Sloane was the problem." Another muttered, "This is disgusting." My uncle added, "I can't believe I defended you for years." The crowd's reaction grew like rolling thunder, low murmurs building into something heavier, something undeniable. The truth was no longer a secret whispered behind closed doors. It was a projection on a wall with 24 witnesses. I stepped forward, not threatening, simply present. My voice remained steady. "You told me I didn't belong in the family. You told me I wasn't one of you. You told me I had no claim to the house my father built with his own hands. You took advantage of a grieving 17-year-old because you assumed she wouldn't question anything." I lifted the folder slightly. "But I grew up, and I learned how to follow paper trails." Laura stared at me, chest rising and falling in harsh, uneven breaths. "You don't understand. Everything I did, everything was for the children." I kept my expression neutral. "That is clear, because every decision benefited only your children, and every lie harmed mine." The room was so quiet you could have heard someone swallow. Aubrey tried again to defend herself, voice trembling. "Mom, say something. Say something. Tell them she's lying." But Laura couldn't, not anymore, because she suddenly realized something she never thought possible. Her power depended entirely on everyone else believing her story, and her story had just been dismantled by evidence, by documentation, by truth, without allies, without the narrative she spent 13 years building, without the illusion of moral superiority. She collapsed, not physically, emotionally. Her shoulders sagged, her chin dropped, her knees bent slightly, and she sank into a chair like someone whose spine had finally given out under the weight of all her secrets. Silence pressed down again. A thick, heavy silence filled with shame she could no longer outrun. She lifted her hands to her face and whispered the same sentence over and over. This wasn't supposed to happen, but the thing about truth is that it doesn't care what people intend. I straightened my uniform, took the USB from the projector, and held it in my palm. The evidence didn't just expose them, it freed me. And as the room continued staring at Laura, Some shocked, some disgusted, some heartbroken, I turned and walked away from the projector table with calm steps, knowing this was only the beginning. The downfall had officially begun. The morning after the country club implosion felt strangely quiet, like the air itself was taking a breath before the next impact. I drove to downtown Fayetteville just after sunrise, parking near the Cumberland County Court building. The sun hadn't fully cleared the rooftops yet, and the brick exterior glowed a soft orange. It looked peaceful, but what was about to unfold inside would be anything but. I stepped through the courthouse doors, uniform crisp papers in hand, and headed straight to the office of Attorney Daniel Whitlock, the man recommended by Ramos, known for his precision and intolerance for fraud. He greeted me with a firm handshake. "Captain Kerrigan, I reviewed the packet you emailed last night." His eyes were sharp, calculating. "This is one of the clearest cases of estate fraud I've seen in years." He laid the papers across his desk, the forged relinquishment, the missing will, the loan documents, the credit card misuse, the handwriting analysis. Then he looked up at me. "This isn't just negligence. This is deliberate, organized, and they counted on the fact that you were a grieving teenager with no legal knowledge." I nodded once, jaw tight. "What happens next?" Whitlock slid a stack of documents toward me. "I've prepared 3 filings. 1 fraud and forgery. 2 recovery of misappropriated estate assets. 3 immediate injunction to prevent them from touching a single thing in that house until the court rules." He paused. "With this level of evidence, the judge will almost certainly sign the injunction today, and they will not see it coming." A slow exhale escaped me. "Good." Whitlock handed me a pen. "Sign here and we file." I signed. Fast, clean, final. By 9:30, the filings had been stamped, logged, and sent to the judge's chambers. By 10:15, the injunction was granted, and by noon, official notices were taped to the front door of the house Laura had claimed as hers for over a decade. No removal of property, no financial activity, no access without legal permission, a legal chokehold, the kind that slowly crushes every lie beneath it. 2 days later, the first court hearing was scheduled. Cumberland County Court was never glamorous fluorescent lights, white walls, and the faint smell of old paper. But that morning, it felt like the center of gravity had shifted. People sensed something was coming, something big. I entered the courtroom in uniform, not for intimidation, just for clarity, credibility, and presence. Laura arrived next, wearing all black like a widow attending her own funeral. Aubrey followed close behind, makeup thicker than normal, as if she believed she could contour away guilt. Hunter came last, his expression tight, jaw clenched, looking like a man who had spent 2 nights trying to come up with excuses and failed all of them. When their eyes met mine, each one flinched in a different way. The bailiff called the session to order. Judge Miriam Holloway, tough sharp, known for zero tolerance of deceit, took her seat at the bench. "Case number 22, CV1473, Kerrigan versus Kerrigan." Whitlock rose. "Your Honor, the evidence for fraud, forgery, estate theft, and unauthorized collateral loans is extensive. We request immediate recovery of property injunction continuation and preliminary ruling for asset return." The judge nodded. "I'll need to see everything." Whitlock handed the binder to the bailiff. The judge opened it, and silence filled the room as she flipped page by page, her eyes sharpening with every document she read. She paused at the forged signature. She tapped her pen on the page. "Mrs. Kerrigan," she said slowly, turning her gaze toward Laura. "This signature is not Captain Kerrigan's." Laura swallowed hard. I don't know how that happened. Maybe she doesn't remember signing it. 17-year-olds often forget things." The judge's eyebrows lifted. "You're suggesting she signed a legal relinquishment during active grief and then forgot." Laura nodded, quickly desperate. "Yes, exactly." The judge's voice hardened. "Signatures do not change in structure, slant, or pressure, even under emotional distress. CID analysis confirms this is a forgery." The room went so silent I could hear someone's shoe tapping under a bench. Aubrey shifted uneasily. Hunter wiped sweat from his forehead. The judge turned to the second set of documents. "And here, the loan documents. Mr. Hunter Kerrigan, you used the Kerrigan home as collateral for a personal loan. Did you have Captain Kerrigan's permission?" Hunter froze like someone had just put a spotlight on him. I I thought the house was ours. I thought the judge cut him off. Permission is not assumed. It is legal. You placed an encumbrance on property that was not fully yours. That is fraud. Then she lifted the next page. And Miss Aubrey Kendall. Purchases totaling nearly $15,000 in goods and jewelry were made from the estate account. Can you explain this? Aubrey's voice cracked. I thought Mom had access. I thought Dad left everything to us. The judge's gaze sharpened. That is not an explanation. That is entitlement. Aubrey's mascara trembled. The judge set the binder down with a soft but decisive thud. This court finds substantial evidence of fraud, forgery, and unlawful use of estate assets. I felt every muscle in my shoulders loosen a fraction. Then the judge delivered the blow. Mrs. Kerrigan, you are hereby ordered to vacate the Kerrigan home within 30 days. Effective immediately. You are prohibited from selling, renting, or transferring any asset related to the estate. Gasps spread across the room. The judge continued. Further investigations into the forged signature are being referred to the district attorney's office. And Mr. Kerrigan, your loan history will be reviewed for criminal liability regarding false collateral claims. His face went pale. The judge turned to Aubrey. And Miss Kendall, your access to all estate-related accounts is terminated as of this moment. Aubrey choked out a sob. That's not fair. It's my engagement ring. The judge's response was colder than steel. It was never yours to buy. It was purchased with stolen funds. Every single charge will be audited. The collapse had begun, and this time it wasn't emotional. It was legal, judicial, documented, permanent. By the time the judge dismissed the session, Laura looked like the room had been tilted beneath her feet. Aubrey covered her face with trembling hands. Hunter stared at the floor like he no longer recognized his own reflection. Whitlock leaned toward me and whispered, That's phase 1. Phase 2 will be worse for them, and better for you. I exhaled slow, controlled, final. Outside, the courthouse sunlight poured onto the steps as people whispered among themselves. Some looked at me with respect, some with sympathy, some with astonishment. But no one looked at me like I was the outsider anymore. Justice had begun its march, and it wasn't stopping. It happened 3 days after the court ruling on a quiet Sunday evening when the world outside felt calm again, almost deceptively peaceful. I had just finished cleaning a shelf in the living room, preparing to start small renovations in the house I had technically owned for years, but emotionally reclaimed only now. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Music played softly from a portable speaker. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like mine. Then came the knock, not soft, not hesitant, heavy, urgent, the kind of knock people use when they believe they're entitled to an answer. I turned off the music and approached the door pulse steady. When I opened it, Laura stood on the porch, hair unbrushed, eyes, swollen mascara smudged. She looked smaller somehow, as if the court ruling had drained the height from her spine. She wrung her hands together, breath shaky. Sloan, please. I stayed still, blocking the doorway with my body. She exhaled a trembling sigh. I know you're angry. I know things got blown out of proportion. I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing. Blown out of proportion. Fraud, forgery, theft, lies, abuse, but sure blown out of proportion. She took a step forward. Her voice broke into that familiar trembling whisper she always used when trying to evoke pity. We're being forced out of the house. I need time. We need time. Please. I lifted one eyebrow. Who is we? She swallowed. Me. And the kids. The kids. She said it like they were toddlers, not full-grown adults who forged signatures and took out fraudulent loans. I kept the doorway blocked. Why are you here, Laura? Her eyes glistened. I'm asking if we can stay here, just for a little while, just until we figure things out. She clasped her hands together like she was praying. I don't have anywhere else to go. My voice remained steady neutral. You do. You have the apartment your sister owns. She shook her head quickly. It's full. It's not suitable. And Hunter, he needs space, and Aubrey, she's fragile right now. I almost laughed again. Fragile. She had used nearly $10,000 of stolen money to buy a ring. Fragile. Laura took another shaky breath. Please, Sloane. We're family. That word hung in the air like smoke. Slow. Poisonous. And suddenly, every moment from the last 13 years replayed behind my eyes. She's not family. Sit in the back. You don't belong with us. You're not one of us. Teach her what pain is. Every dismissal. Every slap of favoritism. Every door slammed in my face when she took over my father's home and erased him from every corner except the parts that benefited her. And now she came to my door with her hands shaking and the word family in her mouth like she had never weaponized it before. I straightened my shoulders and let silence fill the porch for a moment. The kind of silence MPs use when they want someone to understand that the next sentence is going to matter. I spoke calmly. There's something I want to repeat back to you. She blinked, hopeful. What? I kept my voice level. You told your daughter I wasn't family. I'm just respecting your words. Her mouth fell open. The color drained from her face completely. Sloane? No, that's not. I didn't mean. But I didn't give her a chance to rewrite history. You made it extremely clear. Over and over. For more than a decade. You set the rules, you drew the line. Now I'm simply honoring it. She wiped at her cheeks. Sloane, please don't do this. We're in trouble. We're losing everything. I nodded slightly. I'm aware. She stuttered. We have nowhere. We can't live on the street. I tilted my head. You should have considered that when you committed fraud. Her mouth quivered. I'm begging you. Don't turn your back on us. I almost pitied her. Almost. Because in that moment she finally understood something fundamental. The power she abused for years was gone, replaced by consequences she never imagined she'd face. I held the door edge with one hand. MP style. Firm. Controlled. Final. You chose your actions. Now you choose your consequences. You don't get to rewrite family when it suddenly becomes convenient. She reached out impulsively, fingers trembling. But I stepped back. The message was clear without force. Not a threat. Just a boundary. A boundary she had never respected in her life. Tears rolled down her face, messy and unchecked. We're family. Please. I met her gaze steady and unmoved. Family protects each other. You tried to destroy me. The sentence hit her harder than anything she expected. Her breath hitched. She tried again, softer, smaller. Sloane. Please. I shook my head once. No. Her shoulders collapsed. All the fight drained out of her. All the entitlement. All the illusions of control. And with that, the conversation was finished. I pulled the door gently but decisively toward me. The final thing she heard before it closed was my voice, calm even. Goodbye, Laura. The latch clicked. Not slammed, not dramatic. Just final. Clean, quiet. The kind of ending she never saw coming because she thought her power over me was permanent. I stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being shut out of a house. I wasn't the outsider. I wasn't the discarded one. I was the one with the door, and I chose to close it. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity, out of self-protection, out of justice. Outside, I heard her sobbing retreat down the steps, her footsteps uneven, her breathing loud in the still air. But I didn't open the door again. Not this time. Not ever. Actions have consequences. And for once, those consequences were hers, not mine. This was the moment the audience of life, the ones who had watched quietly, the ones who had doubted, the ones who had judged, finally saw the truth. And it was the moment I truly reclaimed myself. The fallout began faster than even I expected. Within 48 hours of Laura standing on my porch, begging for a place to stay, the story she crafted, her desperate, dramatic, self-pitying narrative, started spreading through town like smoke trying to mask a fire. Except the problem with smoke is simple. Eventually, everyone sees the flames. I first heard about it from my old neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, who sent me a text early Monday morning. Honey, your stepmother is telling people you kicked her out on the street and destroyed your own family. But people are asking questions. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying with nothing more than thank you, because that was the beginning, the first ripple in the pond. Laura spun the same story to every adult who would listen, every neighbor, every relative who hadn't been at the country club, and every Facebook group she still had admin access to. Sloane came back from the army changed. She's angry, unstable. She humiliated us in front of everyone. She's trying to steal the house I've lived in for 13 years. She's tearing this family apart. It was a familiar tactic smear the victim before the truth catches up. But this time, the truth was already waiting, documented in black ink, stamped with county seals, verified by CID, projected on a wall in front of a room full of witnesses. And word travels fast in Fayetteville. Very fast. The first wave of pushback came from the older relatives, the ones who remembered my father, who had seen him bury himself in work to support Laura's lifestyle, who had witnessed the quiet shift in the family after he died. Aunt Margaret was the most vocal. She confronted Laura the very next day at church, according to half a dozen witnesses. "Don't you dare rewrite what happened. We all saw it. You lied, you stole, you forged. That girl has suffered enough." Laura left the service early. People talked, they whispered, and for the first time in her life, none of the whispers were in her favor. At the grocery store, someone approached her and asked if it was true she forged documents. She stormed out, leaving a basket full of produce behind. At the nail salon, she loved bragging about the employees avoided small talk, and another customer muttered "thief" under her breath as she passed. Little fractures appeared in the social armor Laura had built for over a decade. The cracks spread fast. Meanwhile, Aubrey, whose whole identity depended on image aesthetics and performing perfection, faced fallout of her own. Her job as the lead planner at Magnolia Weddings, one of the high-end wedding venues in the area, depended on reputation. And reputation depends on public perception. The morning after the projection incident, her boss called her into the office and closed the door behind them. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. According to what one of the assistants leaked online, it went like this. "We cannot have someone associated with financial abuse working with clients. You lied about how you purchased your engagement ring. You used stolen funds. We cannot risk this company's name." Aubrey's response was hysterical at best. "Everyone is lying about me. My stepsister is framing us." The boss simply handed her a termination letter. She was escorted out. The story hit the local event planning community within hours. She lost every client she'd booked, every collaboration, every vendor contact. In a world built on curated images, her mask shattered. For someone whose self-worth depended entirely on being admired, it was a public execution. Hunter's collapse was quieter but more severe. The bank had already been reviewing his loan, but once Whitlock filed the estate fraud complaint, a forensic review was triggered. The investigators found the truth quickly. Hunter had lied on the application, inflated his income, and used the house. My father's house as collateral for a gambling debt he had been hiding for years. But the dagger came from a different angle. The lender notified him he was in violation of the terms, and the state began reviewing it for possible criminal charges. He tried to contact me 3 missed calls, 1 voicemail I never bothered to open. He also tried showing up at the house once, but I saw his car from the window and locked the door. I wasn't going to give him an opportunity to twist anything. MP training taught me something simple and essential. Not every confrontation requires engagement. Sometimes the most powerful move is refusing to participate. And without a target to manipulate, his bravado collapsed inward. Last I heard, he moved into a friend's basement and spent most of his days avoiding creditors. Then came the community shift. This was the part no one in the family expected. Fayetteville is a military town, and military towns operate on a different moral compass than most places. People pay attention, people remember, people talk. And when they hear that a 31-year-old military police captain exposed financial exploitation, forgery, and theft, well, the public takes that seriously. Truth travels faster when backed by credibility. A woman I barely knew stopped me at Starbucks. "Good for you," she said. "Families like that think they can do whatever they want." A retired Army sergeant at the hardware store recognized me from the country club and said, "You handled that like a leader. Proud of you, Captain." And perhaps the most powerful shift came from within the family itself. Cousins who once shrugged at my existence now texted me apologies. Uncles who never invited me to gatherings suddenly asked if I wanted help fixing up the house. And not once did anyone defend Laura Aubrey or Hunter. The lie had rotted too deeply. The truth had been too public. A week after the community turned against her, Laura posted a long, rambling Facebook message blaming jealous relatives, Sloane's ego, and misunderstandings blown out of context. Within an hour, comments flooded in. "You forged documents. Stop lying. Your children stole from their own father's estate. We saw the evidence." She deleted the post by noon. For the first time in her life, she couldn't weaponize perception. She couldn't manipulate the narrative. She couldn't turn me into the enemy. The truth had replaced her voice, and the community had replaced her authority. The irony was poetic. For years, she taught her children that I wasn't family, that I wasn't worthy, that I didn't matter. But now the entire town treated her the way she treated me. The outsider, the liar, the problem. And I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to fight them physically or emotionally. I only had to reveal what they'd already done. Actions speak. Evidence speaks louder. And consequences speak the loudest. The downfall had become public. The collapse wasn't just legal, it was social. It was reputational. It was irreversible. And I had barely begun. It happened on a Thursday night, one of those deceptively calm evenings when the world is quiet enough that you can hear your own heartbeat if you sit still. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters, the air still smelling faintly of pine cleaner and warm dishwater. The house. My father's house felt peaceful in a way it never had when Laura controlled it. For the first time since I was 17, the walls didn't feel hostile. They felt like home. I was halfway down the hallway heading toward my bedroom when a sound jolted me out of that calm. A heavy, rapid pounding on the front door. Not a polite knock. Not a hesitant tap. A violent, rhythmic assault sending vibrations through the wood. Bam! 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 I froze mid-step, the kind of stillness that training ingrains into your muscles. My mind didn't panic. It processed. Time, 11:04 p.m. No expected visitors. No deliveries. Neighborhood usually asleep by 10. Bam. 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 Then the voice followed. Sharp. Unhinged. Slurred. "Open this door. Now." "Laura." My jaw clenched. After everything, after court, after exposure, after consequences, she had the audacity to show up here again. And at 11 at night. I approached the entryway, my steps controlled, deliberate. Before touching the handle, I glanced through the peephole. There she was. Hair disheveled, cheeks, blotchy eyes wide with that frantic mix of entitlement and desperation. She wasn't crying this time. She was furious, almost vibrating with rage. "Open this door, Sloane. I'm not leaving until you talk to me." I inhaled slowly and unlocked the deadbolt, but only the deadbolt keeping the chain in place. I cracked the door an inch. "Laura, it's 11 at night. You need to leave." She shoved against the door immediately, trying to force it open. The chain caught, but the hit was strong enough to rattle the frame. "You think you can do this to us? You think you can destroy this family and walk around like some hero?" She tried again to force the door. The chain strained. I kept my voice level. Laura stepped back from my door. "Now!" She didn't step back. She shoved again, harder this time. The chain groaned. "Open it. You owe me answers. You owe me respect." She wasn't listening. She wasn't stable. And the situation was escalating exactly the way domestic disturbances do when an aggressor loses control of the narrative. I closed the door firmly. Click. Her fists immediately slammed against the wood. Bam! 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 "Open the door. You can't ignore me." I moved quickly and quietly to my bedroom closet, retrieved my body cam, a tool I used not only on duty but in any situation where escalation was possible. I clipped it to my shirt, turned it on. The small green light blinked alive. Then I returned to the living room and stood by the door, not opening it, simply monitoring. The pounding continued. "You think you're safe in there? You think a judge can take my house away and that's just fine? You think this is over?" I called through the door. Laura, I am giving you a lawful verbal warning. Leave my property. She kicked the bottom of the door. Hard. My patience evaporated. Not emotionally, professionally. MP training is simple step 1 verbal command. Step 2, warn. Step 3, protect yourself. I unlocked the door. This time I unhooked the chain, and when I opened it only a foot or two, Laura lunged. She stormed forward, arm raised, not with a weapon, but with full intention to strike. She crossed onto my property into my space without permission, and she was one step away from making physical contact. I reacted before thought even fully formed because that's what training is. My left hand deflected her forward momentum, hooking her wrist exactly the way we drilled in MP defensive tactics. My right hand controlled the elbow, guiding her movement downward, redirecting, not harming. A clean restraint. Controlled. Minimal. She gasped when her knees gave out. I guided her to the ground, chest down, one arm gently but firmly secured behind her back. Not twisting, not torquing, just holding. Her voice erupted into the night. Get off me! You're hurting me! Help! Help! Somebody help! I didn't raise my voice. Laura stopped resisting. You forced entry into my home. You attempted physical contact. You are being detained for safety. The porch camera blinked red. The body cam blinked green. Every second recorded. She thrashed lightly, not enough to break free, but enough to sell the performance she thought people would believe. You're attacking me. This is assault. I responded the same way I would on duty. Your actions are being recorded on multiple devices. Cease resisting. But she didn't stop. Not until she heard the sound of my phone unlocking with Face ID, followed by a single calm statement. I'm calling 911. Her entire body went rigid. No. Don't. Stop. You can't. But I already had the dispatcher on the line. My voice stayed steady. This is Captain Sloan Kerrigan requesting immediate police response to 214 Ridgeview Lane. Aggressor forced entry and attempted physical assault. I have her detained safely. Body cam recording, no weapons, no injuries. Laura let out a noise somewhere between a sob and a scream. You liar. You tricked me. You're setting me up. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Within minutes, patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing silently through the neighborhood. The same older officer from the previous incident stepped out. The moment he saw the scene, me kneeling beside a restrained aggressor, my body cam blinking, his entire posture shifted into procedural certainty. Captain, what happened? I released pressure on her wrist but kept her in position. She forced entry. She attempted to strike me. I performed a safety restraint and called you immediately. He nodded once. Ma'am, stay still. We'll take it from here. Laura tried one more time. She attacked me. She dragged me to the ground. I was asking for help. She's dangerous. The officer didn't even bother responding verbally. He simply said, body cam, and I handed him the device. He clipped it to his vest and pressed the playback button. Every word, every command, every warning, every shove, every lunge, captured in perfect clarity. After 1 minute of viewing, he exhaled. She was the aggressor. The younger officer cuffed her gently, reading her rights. She cried harder. Are you seriously arresting me? I'm the victim. I'm the mother. This is my family. The officer remained steady. Ma'am, you are being taken into custody for trespassing, harassment, attempted forced entry, and falsifying a report during a prior incident. Laura's voice rose into a high-pitched panic. Sloan, stop them. Do something. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. I straightened my posture. You created this situation. Not me. She stared at me with pure betrayal, like she genuinely could not understand how the world no longer bent for her. But consequences don't bend for anyone. The officers guided her into the cruiser. As they closed the door, Laura shouted through the window, You're ruining this family! You're evil! You're heartless! I stepped closer, calm, measured, and said the single sentence she never expected to hear. You can't blame me for repercussions you created. The car pulled away, leaving silence behind. The younger officer turned to me. Captain, Your restraint technique was perfect, minimal force, full compliance, and frankly, you saved yourself from something much worse." His partner added, "Not many people keep their cool in a situation like that. You handled this by the book." I nodded. "Thank you." Once they left, I walked back inside and locked the door. This time, the latch didn't just click, it sealed. A boundary, a truth, a turning point. I stood in the quiet living room, the house dim except for the soft glow of a lamp. For the first time in years, the fear in my chest wasn't mine. It belonged to the person who had spent over a decade trying to control me. And now she was the one losing control. Actions, evidence, accountability. It all caught up with her. And as I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of the night settle into my bones, a realization broke over me like a sunrise. I was done being the child they pushed aside. I was done being the quiet victim. I was done letting their lies define me. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't revenge. It was simply the truth, finally given space to breathe. And tonight, the truth had won. The hearing to finalize ownership of the house, my father's house, was scheduled for the following Friday morning. The moment the date hit my inbox, something inside me settled. Not relaxed, settled. Like a compass clicking into its true north. This wasn't just paperwork anymore. It wasn't just legal cleanup. It wasn't even revenge. This was a reclamation of my childhood, my father, my identity, and every piece of dignity they tried to strip from me. I arrived at the Cumberland County Courthouse in full Class A uniform. Whitlock stood waiting outside the courtroom doors, briefcase in one hand and a look of assured confidence on his face. "Captain, ready." I nodded, more than ready. The hallway bustled with people, most attending unrelated hearings, but conversations lowered as I passed. A few nods, a few murmured "ma'am." Military towns always do that, instinctively recognize the discipline in a uniform. Inside the courtroom, Laura sat beside her attorney, looking exhausted, but still clinging to that thin thread of performative innocence. Her hair was neatly curled makeup heavy enough to hide the stress lines. She wore a conservative navy dress, probably trying to appeal to the judge's sensibilities. Aubrey sat behind her arms, crossed expression, tight. Hunter didn't even show up. His absence was an answer in itself. The bailiff called the session to order. Judge Miriam Holloway entered, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She wasted no time. "We are here to address the petition for rightful ownership of the Kerrigan residence filed by Captain Sloan Kerrigan. Parties are present. Counsel proceed." Whitlock stood. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. Captain Kerrigan's father left a will specifying equal division of property. That will vanish under suspicious circumstances. A forged relinquishment signature confirmed by CID forensic analysis was filed to secure sole ownership for Mrs. Laura Kerrigan. The home was then used as collateral for her son's personal debt, also without Captain Kerrigan's consent or knowledge. These are not assumptions. These are documented truths." He handed the judge a neatly tabbed binder. "Your Honor, we request immediate full transfer of the home to its rightful heir, Captain Kerrigan." Laura's attorney rose, nervous, sweating slightly. He adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, my client, she admits mistakes may have been made, but she—" Judge Holloway cut him off. "Mistakes. Counsel forgery is not a mistake. It is a felony. Filing false probate documents is not a mistake. It is a crime. Using property that is not legally yours as collateral is not a mistake. It is fraud." The entire room froze. Laura's eyes widened. Aubrey's jaw twitched. I remained still, posture straight, hands at my sides. The judge turned directly to Laura. "Mrs. Kerrigan, before we proceed, do you have anything you wish to say regarding the forged signature?" Laura inhaled, shakily, eyes darting from me to the judge. "Your Honor, I was overwhelmed. Tom had just passed. I was alone with 2 children. I didn't know how to handle everything. I thought Sloan didn't want anything to do with us." I thought the judge held up a single hand. "Silence. Mrs. Kerrigan, the signature is not hers. You knew that. You filed it anyway." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "I was trying to protect my family." The judge's reply was swift. She is your family. Laura's tears faltered, caught by surprise. But the judge wasn't finished. Stealing from a child is not protection, it is exploitation. And the fact that Captain Kerrigan was 17 at the time makes this even more concerning. Aubrey shifted uncomfortably. The judge continued, voice sharp with authority. And before you mention stress or confusion, CID analysis indicated the signature was forged with deliberate intent, not produced during emotional distress. Laura sank back into her chair, deflated, exposed, and this time no manipulation could save her. The judge closed the binder and removed her glasses. When she spoke again, the entire room leaned forward. This court finds that the Kerrigan residence was obtained through fraudulent means, including forged documents and deliberate concealment of the legal heir's rights. My pulse slowed, not racing, not anxious, steady. Therefore, the judge continued, effective immediately. The Kerrigan home shall be transferred fully to Captain Sloane Kerrigan. I exhaled softly, controlled, but the pressure in my chest eased in a way I hadn't felt since I was a child. The judge wasn't done. She looked directly at me. Miss Kerrigan, this home was always yours. The words hit with a force no shout could ever match. They broke something open inside me, something I'd been holding shut for years. My father's memory. The little girl who lived in that house. The teenager who had been pushed out. The soldier who had been dismissed as not family. All of it anchored into that single sentence. Always yours. Not borrowed. Not shared. Not taken away. Mine. I nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge turned her attention back to Laura. You are ordered to vacate the residence immediately. You will not enter the property without express written permission from Captain Kerrigan. Any violation will result in criminal trespass charges. Aubrey let out a broken gasp. But where are we supposed to go? The judge didn't look at her. Actions have consequences. You will have to face them. The gavel struck once, firm, final. Court adjourned. As people began filing out, I gathered my documents, moving with calm precision. Laura approached me slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal. Sloane. Her voice trembled with a mix of fear and disbelief. Please. We don't have anywhere. I turned just enough so we were facing each other. The judge gave instructions. You are to leave the property immediately. But we're family, she whispered desperately. We're blood. I shook my head. We both know that's not what you believed, not until you needed something. Her shoulders sagged. Aubrey tugged on her arm, shooting daggers at me. Let's go, Mom. She doesn't care. They left the courtroom slowly, Laura stumbling slightly in shock. Whitlock caught up to me and handed back the binder. Congratulations, Captain. You did this by the book. No shortcuts. That matters. I nodded, because it did matter. Justice earned is different from victory taken. We stepped outside into the sunshine, and the warmth hit my face like a quiet blessing. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in deeply. The wind rustled the trees. A pair of soldiers walked by. A child laughed somewhere in the distance. Life kept moving. But for me, something had just been set right that had been wrong for far too long. When I arrived back at the house, my house, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air felt different, lighter, warmer. The sunlight filtering through the windows looked golden instead of harsh. I walked through each room slowly, almost reverently. The living room where my father used to read. The hallway where I once hung school pictures before Laura took them down. The kitchen table where he and I used to eat breakfast together. This wasn't just a house anymore. This was the ending of their story about me and the beginning of mine. I set the binder down on the dining table and ran my fingertips over the wood grain. The house didn't feel haunted by the past anymore. It felt claimed. It felt healed. It felt like home. And for the first time in my adult life, I knew with absolute certainty they could never take it from me again. In the days following the final court ruling, the house no longer felt like the scene of a battle. It felt like a canvas waiting for color again. The first morning I woke, knowing the property was officially permanently mine. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors in long, golden bars that made the place feel warm, almost welcoming. I stood in the hallway, barefoot coffee mug in hand, and realized something strange. It was the first time since childhood that the house didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel like I needed to brace myself before walking into a room. It didn't feel like I had to keep my shoulders tense. The walls no longer held their voices, their lies, their rules. The air was different now. It belonged to me. The quiet wasn't loneliness. It was peace. Real peace. I spent the next week beginning the slow restoration of everything they had neglected. I started with the living room. The wallpaper Laura had installed, a sickly beige pattern she claimed was neutral elegance, came down in strips. Underneath it, I found the same off-white paint color my father chose years ago. I smiled when I saw it. I remembered standing beside him in an oversized painting shirt, dipping my brush into a small tray and trying not to spill. He said, "Paint was like life. Steady strokes, kiddo. Don't rush." I repainted the entire room in a soft, warm gray. Something modern, clean. Mine. Then I hung the first picture, a framed photograph of my father holding a fishing pole, smiling at the camera with his cap crooked sideways. I placed it on the mantel where Laura once displayed decorative candles she never lit. Seeing him there exactly where he should have been all along sent a warmth through my chest that I hadn't felt in decades. Room by room, the house transformed. The upstairs hallway got new lighting. The spare bedroom became a quiet meditation space. The kitchen walls were scrubbed until they shone. I patched small holes in the drywall, repaired cracked trim, cleaned out cabinets still holding old expired spices from Laura's pantry. Each task felt symbolic, a small reclamation of a space I'd been denied piece by piece. But the most important change was the removal of one item. A framed portrait of Laura's children, Aubrey and Hunter, had once hung in the center of the stairwell. It was the first thing anyone saw walking upstairs. That portrait had been her way of staking a claim on the house of broadcasting whose family mattered. The morning after the ruling, I took it down. The wall beneath had a faint square of untouched paint, like a ghost of the lie she spent years telling. I didn't throw the portrait away. I placed it face down in a box labeled Old Items and slid it into the attic. Out of sight, out of claim, out of power. I would not destroy it, not because I cared for them, but because destruction is not the same as healing. Healing is choosing what stays on display. A few days later, a familiar black SUV pulled into the driveway. I was on the porch tightening a loose railing screw when I saw CID Liaison Officer Henrietta Ramos step out, sunglasses on braid pulled tight. She smiled when she saw me. "Damn, Kerrigan. This place already looks different." I shrugged lightly. "It feels different." She walked up the steps and handed me a paper bag. "I brought celebration muffins. Don't judge the shape." "I am a better investigator than baker." I laughed. Noted. We sat on the porch, eating slightly lopsided blueberry muffins, letting the breeze sweep across the yard. Ramos glanced at the house. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "Better than I expected," I said. I didn't realize how much of myself I shut down when I left this house at 17. "That's trauma for you," she said simply. "It doesn't show up until it's gone." We talked for nearly an hour about the case, about her upcoming rotation, about my plans to renovate the driveway myself. Eventually, another car pulled up, Sergeant Lena Cho from my MP unit, carrying a box with a bow on top. She set it on the porch table. "Housewarming gift," she announced. "Technically, it's just good coffee beans, but I wrapped it like something fancy." Soon after Private Ellis arrived, then Corporal Jameson, then First Lieutenant Knox. Within 30 minutes, half my MP section was standing in my front yard. Ramos laughed. "You said you didn't want a party. They ignored you." I looked around at all of them, uniforms, off-duty clothes, jackets, ball caps, and something inside me softened. These were the people who stood by me without needing a last name or shared bloodline. These were the people who never treated me like I didn't belong. This was family, real family. Someone dragged a portable speaker out of their trunk, and music filled the yard. We cleaned up old branches, hauled out dusty boxes. Knox helped me replace a faulty porch light. Cho swept the walkway. Ellis painted the front window trim with overly dramatic precision. I watched them, a warmth building in my chest. This was the kind of belonging I'd always wanted but never knew how to ask for, and now, without even asking it, had shown up on my lawn carrying coffee beans and toolboxes. Later that afternoon, as the group was preparing to leave, Knox handed me a manila folder. "This is from Major Whitaker at Fort Liberty," he said. "He wanted you to have it today." Confused, I opened it. Inside was a formal letter printed on crisp military stationery. "Department of the Army. Office of Provost Marshal." I read the first line twice before it fully registered. "Captain Kerrigan, based on your exemplary adherence to MP protocol, your professionalism during multiple civilian incidents, and your leadership under pressure, the command is recommending you for a specialized assignment, training incoming MP recruits at Fort Liberty." I blinked. Ramos grinned. "Told you something good was coming." Ellis chimed in. "You're basically going to be the cool instructor everyone respects, but fears a little." I laughed, but the truth hit me fully. Training recruits meant trust. It meant responsibility. It meant recognition. But it also meant something deeper, something that reached back into my past. It meant the Army saw me as someone who could shape new soldiers. It meant they saw me as stable, competent, worthy. It meant that the girl who had been pushed out of her own home at 17 had grown into a leader capable of teaching the next generation of MPs how to stand their ground, not with violence, but with clarity and restraint. I closed the folder and held it against my chest. "I'll accept," I said quietly. Ramos clapped my shoulder. "Good. You're exactly the kind of person the next batch needs." That evening, after they all left and the house returned to its peaceful quiet, I made myself a cup of coffee and walked out to the backyard. The grass rustled in the wind. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange and pink. I sat on the old wooden bench my father once built, weathered but still strong. I held the letter in my hand and breathed slowly. The transformation inside me felt heavy but soft. From victim to soldier, to survivor, to leader, to someone finally living free. I closed my eyes and let the breeze settle across my face. Healing wasn't a switch. It wasn't instant. It wasn't clean. It was a slow unraveling of fear, a gentle rebuilding of trust, a deliberate choice to breathe differently each day. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was fighting ghosts. I didn't feel like I was bracing for the next blow. I didn't feel like I had to earn a place at someone else's table. I felt whole, safe, home. The world was quiet. But this time, the quiet wasn't threatening. It was mine. The morning I chose to plant the oak tree, the air carried the faint chill of early autumn, the kind that brushes your skin gently before the day warms up. Light filtered softly through the pine trees along the edge of the yard, scattering thin beams across the grass like quiet reminders that the world keeps moving forward, whether we are ready or not. I stood on the front lawn, barefoot, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the rotted stump near the driveway. It had been there for years, dark and splintered, a broken reminder of something that once grew but had been strangled slowly over time. My father planted that old tree when I was 5. He called it his hope tree. He said it would grow shade for the front porch and give us roots in this house. After he died, Laura never bothered watering it. By the time I left home at 17, the trunk was already cracking. A few years later, it collapsed, rotted from the inside out, the hollow center crawling with decay. I remembered standing on this same lawn as a teenager and hearing Laura complain that the stump was an eyesore, yet she never had it removed. Maybe she liked the way it looked. Maybe she liked having something dead at the entrance to the house, a symbol that whispered what she believed nothing before her deserved to live. Today, that stump would finally go. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and picked up the small set of tools I borrowed from a neighbor last night. A handsaw, a pry bar, a digging spade. It took time, more time than I expected. The stump was stubborn, just like the years of silence and pain that kept it rooted. I sawed through the last splintered section of the trunk, each scrape of the blade echoing in the quiet morning. Sweat gathered along my hairline, even though the air was cool. My arms trembled once from the strain, but I didn't stop. When the final wedge loosened, I wedged the pry bar beneath it, pushed with both hands, and felt the stump give way with a deep crack. It toppled onto the grass hollow and brittle, the center dark, like an old bruise that had never healed. I stared at it for a long moment. Something inside my chest shifted as I knelt and touched the soft, crumbled interior. It was lighter than I thought. So delicate it broke apart between my fingers. A perfect metaphor for everything my stepmother tried to build on top of my father's foundation. It never had strength. It only pretended. I carried the broken pieces to a compost bin and emptied them in. The hollow weight left inside me lifted just a little more as the last fragment fell through the bin's opening. When I returned to the yard, the hole where the stump had been remained open, a dark circle of exposed earth. It looked raw yet full of potential. A wound and a promise at the same time. I brushed soil from my hands and walked to the porch where the small oak sapling waited. I bought it yesterday from a nursery outside Hope Mills. The woman who helped me choose it asked if it was for a memorial. I paused before answering, unsure of how to explain that it was not about death but about life returning. Finally, I nodded and said, yes, but also no. She didn't push for more. People who work with living things seem to understand the quiet stories behind them. I carried the sapling to the hole and lowered it gently into the earth. The leaves rustled softly in the breeze, delicate and bright green, trembling just enough to make it look alive and listening. I straightened the trunk, then crouched down to fill the space around it with fresh soil I'd prepared earlier. The dirt crumbled warm and rich through my fingers. I pressed it into place slowly, carefully, making sure the roots were covered but not smothered. Every handful felt symbolic grounding, intentional. When the last layer was smoothed over, I sat back on my heels and exhaled a long breath I didn't know I was holding. The yard was quiet, except for a distant bark from a neighbor's dog and the hum of a lawnmower a few houses down. The world felt larger, softer, more honest. I touched the thin trunk gently with my fingertips and whispered, "Dad, I'm finally home." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Saying them felt like closing a chapter with tenderness instead of rage. It felt like reclaiming not just a house, but myself. I stayed there for a few minutes, letting the moment settle. Then I stood and walked to the porch to grab my watering can. I filled it at the spigot near the driveway and returned to the tree, pouring water around the base until the soil darkened and absorbed it fully. The oak would take years to grow tall enough to cast shade, but it would grow, slowly, steadily, patiently, not rushed, not controlled, not neglected. It would grow the way I intended to live going forward. As I finished watering, a car turned onto the street, a familiar white truck. I recognized the sound of the engine before I saw the driver. It was my neighbor, Mr. Jennings, a retired Army sergeant who had lived next door since before I was born. He rolled down the window and tipped his cap. "Morning, Captain." I smiled. "Morning." He pointed to the sapling. "New tree?" "Yes." "Replacing the old one." He nodded with understanding. "Good choice. Oaks are strong. They last." He paused, studying me with the steady gaze of someone who has seen more life than he talks about. "Your father would like that." I swallowed gently. "I think so too." He gave a small salute and drove off. Simple, respectful, healing. I spent the rest of the morning finishing small repairs on the porch railing. With each nail tapped into place, I felt the house settle more into its new identity. Not a battlefield, not a shrine to pain, not a museum of someone else's control. A home. My home. In the early afternoon, I brought out a folded wooden chair and positioned it beneath the front window. I sat down with a fresh cup of coffee and watched the oak tree sway in the breeze, its leaves catching sunlight like tiny flickers of hope. My phone buzzed with a new email from Fort Liberty headquarters. The subject line read, "Preliminary Schedule for MP Instructor Orientation." I opened it and saw the date. 2 weeks from today. My new chapter was already on the calendar. A quiet smile pulled at my mouth. This time, I wasn't stepping into a role to escape something. I was stepping into it to build something. As the day warmed, I walked inside and opened the windows so fresh air could flow through the house. The curtains billowed softly with each passing gust, filling the rooms with a calm energy. I hung a few more pictures of my father arranged books along the shelves and placed a small clay bowl on the kitchen counter that Ramos had given me as a joke. She said it was for keys or thoughts that needed holding. I used it for both. By late afternoon, the house felt almost complete. Not finished, but alive again. When the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, I stepped outside one last time. The sky burned in shades of orange and violet. The oak tree stood small but sturdy, its silhouette already taking shape against the fading light. I approached it slowly, touching the young trunk with the back of my hand. It didn't matter how long it took to grow. What mattered was that it had finally been planted in the right soil. Soil free of rot, free of lies, free of the people who tried to hollow out everything my father built. This time the roots would be real. I whispered one more time, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. "I'm home, Dad, for real this time." And as the wind brushed through the leaves, the small branches rustled softly, almost like an answer. If you've stayed with me until this final moment, through every quiet bruise in my memory, through every whispered insult at the dinner table, through every choice I made, not to explode, but to proceed one careful step at a time, then you already understand something important about stories like mine. Justice is never instant. Healing is never loud. And survival, real survival, is not always the dramatic sprint the movies make it out to be. Sometimes it is nothing more than a slow walk back to the front door of a house you were pushed out of as a teenager and finding the courage to walk inside again. People often imagine that revenge feels like fire and thunder, like a roar that shakes the earth. But the truth is far quieter. Revenge only satisfies the wound. Justice satisfies the soul. And justice, the real kind, is methodical, documented, calm. It is the steady voice on a 911 call, the body cam footage that confirms the truth. The judge who reads the evidence slowly before lifting her eyes and saying words that change everything. It is the weight of a house key in your palm when the house finally belongs to you again. It is the feeling of dirt under your fingertips as you plant something new where something rotten once stood. If you have ever lived through a family like mine, you know exactly what I mean. The kind of family that twists definitions of loyalty until they become cages. The kind of adults who use love like a lever to control what they never earned. The kind who raise their voices not to communicate but to command. The kind who pretend that blood is the only measure of belonging, then weaponize that belief to decide who counts and who doesn't. The kind who say family with pride but behave with cruelty. The kind who forget that loyalty without respect is just obedience, and obedience without love is just captivity. So many of you watching, especially those in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, have written to this channel with stories that sound heartbreakingly familiar. Stories of stepmothers who saw you as competition instead of children. Stories of siblings who treated you as an intruder in your own home. Stories of adults who believed that favoritism was a parenting style. Stories of long silences at dinner tables, of doors slammed in your face, of being told that you were too much or not enough or simply not theirs. Stories of walking away because staying would have crushed you. Stories of rebuilding yourself from the ground up while the people who were supposed to love you barely noticed you were gone. To you I say this, you did not imagine it. You did not exaggerate it. You did not overreact. You survived it. And sometimes the first step toward justice is simply acknowledging that what happened to you was real. I know many of you watching have worn uniforms too. Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, National Guard, police, firefighters, EMTs. You know the discipline it takes to keep your hands still when your instincts scream otherwise. You know how difficult it is to de-escalate when you were raised around people who only understood escalation. You know the way training rewires the part of your brain that once tried to answer pain with pain. You know how it teaches you to stand without trembling, even when you are surrounded by people who want to see you fall. That is why so many of you connect with stories like this. Because justice does not come from raising your voice. Justice comes from raising your standards. Justice comes from saying no when someone who has hurt you demands yes. Justice comes from choosing restraint over aggression and knowing it does not make you weak. Justice comes from stepping out of the shadows of the people who claimed to be your family and stepping into the life you were meant to live. Justice comes from planting your own tree on your own soil. And yet, even for those who never served in the military or any uniformed profession, this story still resonates. Because toxic families do not care about rank or training or adulthood. They know how to find your childhood fears and use them as anchors. They know how to press old bruises with new fingers. They know how to force their definitions of family onto a world that has long outgrown them. They know how to punish anyone who refuses to play the role they wrote for you. And every time you stand up, every time you take back a piece of your life, every time you tell the truth, even when they deny it, you reclaim something they never had the right to take from you in the first place. To those of you who are older now, who raised children of your own, who carry the wisdom of decades, I ask you this. How many times have you stayed quiet at a family gathering because it felt easier? How many times have you looked back at your younger self and wished someone had stood up for them? How many times did you think justice was out of reach simply because the people who hurt you shared your roof or your name? If my story has shown anything, it is this: it is never too late to reclaim what was taken from you. It is never too late to stand at the door of your past and say, enough. It is never too late to choose truth over tradition. It is never too late to pick up a shovel, dig out what has rotted, and plant something new. So now, before we end this journey together, I want to ask you the same question that sits at the heart of every story on this channel. Because your voice matters, your experience matters, your city, your time zone, your scars, your victories, they all matter. Every comment you leave on these stories reminds someone else that they are not alone. Someone scrolling at midnight might see your words and finally feel understood. Someone drinking coffee in their kitchen might recognize their own life in your story. Someone who has never spoken about what happened to them might finally open their mouth because you were brave enough to write first. So, here is the closing question I always ask, the one that binds this community together across states and countries and years of lived experience. Where are you watching from? Drop your city and your time right now. I want to know where this story found you. I want to know what part of the world is sitting with me in this quiet moment beneath the new oak tree. And more importantly, tell me this. What would you have done if you had been the one standing in that doorway? If you had been the one told you weren't family? If you had been the one pushed, shoved, silenced? If you had been the one forced to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? What would you have done if this had been your life, your house, your past? There is no right answer. There is only your answer. And sometimes your answer changes everything for someone else who is watching. So tell me, tell all of us, where are you watching from? What time is it there? And what would you have done?